I've been thinking about doing a medley for a while. When I'm playing acoustic gigs, I do these mashups where basically I take a bunch of songs and mix them all together. I go in with no real set plan. I just sort of wing it. Whatever pops in my head, I play and just sort of see where that takes me. And I thought that'd be kind of cool to try and emulate that that whole vibe in the studio. But I'd be able to do it the way that I'd actually hear, or that I actually hear it. So with drums, electric guitar, bass, harmonies, and vocal lines crossing over one another. It's something that I can't really do live. I have a little bit of room to move because I use a Boss RC300 loop station and also the TC Helicon Voice Live Play for the harmonies. So it sort of touches on what I'm hearing, but realistically, I only have 3 stereo loop channels to play with. So I wanted to play around a little bit with that concept in the studio environment. My original list had 9 songs. The first was Walk by the Foo Fighters, and that's from the Thor movie. Then Hero by Chad Kroeger from the first Spiderman film. Next up on the list was Ordinary by Train from Spider-Man 2. And that's not really one of Train's most well-known songs, but it is one of my personal favorites, so I had to sneak that in there. Then there was also Bring Me to Life by Evanescence, and that's from the Daredevil soundtracks. I also had Kryptonite by Three Doors Down and Superman by Five for Fighting. Now, both of those songs weren't in the Superman films at all, but since they were both about Superman, I thought I'd include them anyway. Then I also had Catch Easy by Audioslave and Back in Black by AC/DC, and both of those were from the Iron Man soundtracks. And I also had this crazy idea of an instrumental section in it as well, where I'd feature Danny Elfman's Batman theme from the original '89 film with Michael Keaton, Jack Nicholson, and Kim Basinger. And so basically in my first arrangement, I put them all together, all 9 of these together, but it was basically really confusing. I played the first version to my wife, and I had vocal lines running over each other, so it sort of sounded like something out of Glee, just suckier. and she just looked at me and went, "Oh, I hate it." So I pretty much scrapped the entire thing and went back to the drawing board and started again. And that's when I came up with the current version, and that came together in about 10 to 12 minutes. I basically just changed my entire thought process. Picked up the acoustic guitar, started playing, and the whole thing came together really easily. And and that's how it turned out. Well, obviously at the end, having 6 songs that were in different keys, different tempos, and different time signatures cut together was always going to be a challenge. My main focus was to try and cut the songs together without destroying the vibe. The song had to keep the driving forward, had to keep driving forward even with all the chops and changes. So what I started with was shifting all the songs into a comfortable vocal key for me to sing. So I brought Bring Me to Life into B minor, so I'd have that chorus starting in B minor. Kryptonite was already in B minor, so I left that where it was in its original key. Superman by Five for Fighting is originally in C major. And so I brought that into D. Then I had Ordinary, Hero, and Walk, and all 3 of those were in the original keys. And then the next problem that I faced was the tempos. Walk was 130 beats a minute in 4/4. Then I had Hero at 147 beats a minute in 6/8. Ordinary's 90 beats in 4/4, Bring Me to Life 96, Kryptonite 99, and finally Superman sits at 106. So those last 4 ones weren't too bad, and what I did was standardize those tracks at 100 beats a minute to try and keep those tempos a little bit consistent throughout the track. Hero, I ended up speeding that up a little bit from the original. And now I had to mainly do this because there was a noticeable substantial drop in the tempo from the original Bring Me to Life intro to the verse of Hero. So the Bring Me to Life intro is at 90 beats, and then what I ended up doing was recording the Hero section with the metronome counting in 6/4 instead of 6/8, and at 80 beats a minute. So it was still 10 beats a minute slower from one bar to the next. But basically what I did was disguise that by bringing in a busy acoustic guitar, strumming the pattern for Hero, doing that. I can hear heaven keeping that strumming pattern there. But previous to that, in the Bring Me to Life section, I basically just hit single strums, so then the tempo change was sort of disguised. And then out of that section, I went into Kryptonite, which I'd standardized at 100 beats a minute, which is a little bit faster than the original, but we are talking 1 beat a minute, so it's pretty much unnoticeable. And then after that, I started really jumping around. I actually sang the chorus to Bring Me to Life while playing the chorus to Kryptonite, although I did come back to the original progression for Bring Me to Life at the end of the chorus. Superman was at 106 originally, and I brought that down to 100. A little bit of a challenge there with the 2/4 bar coming out of the chorus with that. 'Cause it's not easy to be me. That A there is on the 2/4 bar. So it was a little bit of a challenge there, but it was more of a minor hiccup than an actual challenge that I had to work around. And then I jumped into Ordinary, and in my original arrangement, I used the verse rather than the pre-chorus chorus section, but that didn't really work. So for this one, I just went straight into that pre-chorus chorus. It was more upbeat than the verse, and also put the key into D, so the next transition will be a lot smoother. And if you've heard the original Ordinary original track from Train, that there is a key change jumping from the verse to the chorus, so keeping everything in D, it sort of worked perfectly. I then came back to Bring Me to Life for just a moment, and what I was doing there was basically setting up the turnaround back into the minor, so the relative minor, the B minor, for the solo section of Kryptonite. Because I really wanted to put that in there, and that was mainly because I was jumping around a lot, and I was trying to keep the format the same as a regular song. So I was following a verse, chorus, bridge, solo, etc., outro. And I basically used each section of each of the songs to cover off on one part of this format. So I went into the Kryptonite solo, and then straight out of that, I go into the breakdown bridge for Hero. That transition was pretty smooth, although coming out of the bridge into Walk was a bit of an issue. Hero's in 6/4, or I was playing it in 6/4 at 80 beats a minute, and I was playing a B flat, C to a D. So it was that. And my love is needed, it's nothing saying to you. Is the love of a hero, that's what I feel won't do. And then I had to shift to 130 beats a minute in 4/4 and in A major into Hero. The learning to walk again. So originally I was coming from the bridge of Hero and going straight into the chorus of Walk. But what that did was, especially with the drums and bass in there, it just highlighted all the key time signature and tempo changes. So my wife suggested to me that I just go into the verse instead. So I tried it out, and it worked a treat. There was no problems there. So there were a few changes here and there, but basically this entire track was a hell of a lot of fun to piece together. The guitar parts for this have basically come down to 5 separate parts, and then the bass. Now the bass line is pretty consistent all the way through. It's just hitting 8s to help drive it along and play off the tonic. Now the 5 separate guitars, I have one that's an acoustic guitar where I'm basically just strumming all the way through it, starting with Hero. The only time I don't strum is when I actually jump into the riff for Kryptonite, because when that comes in, I actually double that on the acoustic. The strumming is to provide a little bit of a percussive element to the whole song, and to also brighten up the whole thing a little bit. And it's adding a little bit of attack to the thick distorted guitars that I'm using. The second part, which is one of the first to hit in the chorus to Hero, is a really thick distorted guitar. Now I tracked this entire thing with Pro Tools and using my 11 rack here. So I used a Mesa Boogie patch to get that thick distortion sounds, and I kept that guitar running pretty much all the way through the song. Anytime you hear that thick distortion, it's the Mesa sound. The only time I didn't use it was when I hit the breakdown of Hero, and also the first half of Walk, and actually the whole section of Superman as well. Because in those bits, the thickness of that distortion was just too much. It was too overbearing for those sections. The next part that I used was actually, I used a live amp. I used my Marshall, my JCM 800. And that came in at the same point as the Mesa. Now this part was where I started introducing the guitar layering or guitar science, which I talked about in one of the earlier Picked Pieces episodes. And guitar science was something that was introduced to me by Brandon Friesen when I was recording the Syndicate album. Now it's basically the background formula, I'm going to use loosely, that's used to get a tonally rich wall of guitars through layering. So for this part, I was using chord inversions at the higher octave. So for example, instead of playing a G there or a G down there, I'd be playing it up here and then maybe using a suspension or the major or the suspended fourth or the sixth, just to add a bit of harmonic richness to it and also to separate the registers a little bit. Now this basically supported the Mesa Boogie part all the way through the track until the dropouts of the Mesa in Walk and Superman, where the Marshall becomes, or the acoustic actually, becomes the dominant guitar part. The third part was using a Vox sound. I had a lighter gain on it and used it for the main riff in Kryptonite, and that's actually the sound I'm using at the moment. Except I think I played it with a single coil. And I also used it for some background layering in the Superman section, and also had an ostinato riff in Ordinary and Walk. And I also used this sound for the solo as well. And all the ostinato pieces parts are buried in the mix, but they were basically there to fill out the sound a little bit more than what you'd get if you were just using the Marshall and the Mesa Boogie sounds together, so it sort of adds that harmonic richness. For the final part, I used my Fender, and I played a combination of what I call ding-dongs and octaves. Now, ding-dongs are basically where I'm playing off the eighths and a pedal tone, so a good example of that you can hear easily in the track is in the Bring Me to Life section. So that note there is your pedal tone, and then I'm playing around with the melody around it. And then I also had octave lines running. So I think in Bring Me to Life as well, I actually used a something like that, where basically it's creating a counter melody that complements both the vocals and the guitar part. To again add to that harmonic richness of the guitars, but it is buried in the mix. They're not a prominent part at all. If it was prominent, it would take away from everything else. So I just had them buried. And the final part was actually using that sound as well for the main riff in Walk. So that's pretty much how I pulled all the guitar parts together. And I think the most important element was trying to use parts of the original guitar parts in all the songs, but not being too precious about playing them exactly the same. I needed to build this piece up from scratch and give my own interpretation to the parts to help the whole medley gel together. Otherwise, it just wouldn't have worked. I'll probably try an acoustic mashup soon. And I was thinking about that and doing it the way that I do it live. So random 3 songs, pull them all together and see where it goes. But on the same turn, I really did enjoy doing this mashup with the full production with drums, bass, electrics, and not just doing an unplugged thing. And there are also a lot of superhero songs that I didn't get into this arrangement. Not only the ones I picked, but heaps of others that I had on a first cut. And there's heaps of films that I didn't represent. So I'm sure I'll be breaking up the electrics again and doing a sequel.